The GCC has long dominated the global hydrocarbon market and continues to play a critical role in shaping the direction of the industry. With its vast oil and gas reserves, the GCC remains well placed to power both the upstream and downstream sector and set the agenda for a greater push towards cleaner energy adoption locally, regionally, and globally. The story of oil in the Middle East is not a contemporary tale that began a long time ago. The first oil discovery in the region was in 1931 at an oil well in the remote Jebel Dukhan area of Bahrain. Soon, one by one, each of the other GCC countries made their own discoveries, paving the way towards a radical transformation across the region. And then in 2016, a new regional initiative was undertaken to further strengthen the association of these countries, and Bahrain was chosen as its headquarters due to the kingdom's strategic location. The Gulf Downstream Association, or GDA, was founded by Saudi Aramco, Bahrain Petroleum Company, Kuwait Petroleum International, Kuwait National Petroleum Company, and Abu Dhabi National Oil Company as a non-profit organization that will serve as a catalyst for strong and sustainable growth of the downstream industry and provide a viable platform for knowledge sharing and best practice.
The idea of GDA started a few years back mainly to promote the cooperation and the coordination between the oil industries in the downstream field to ensure that we have a vehicle within the GCC to share practices, share lessons learned.
The Gulf Downstream Association, it's bring a lot of experience of industry. We are focusing into bringing these experience together and putting these company into the perspective and its real position in the oil and gas industry.
GDA's formation provides the springboard for effective partnerships across the region that will build on the strengths of each member organization in preparing a world-class workforce that can meet the challenges of tomorrow. And most crucially, help in creating a voice for the region on international platforms by being innovative, by creating a knowledge hub, and serving as a reference point for all stakeholders.
Our approach is very simple. If I have an area of excellence that I've excelled in, then it only makes sense that among the different companies within the GCC that we will be able to share and all of us excelling at the same time.
The key to GDA's long-term success will be the values that guide its operations, as well as the main propositions that drive its appeal.
Year 2018, we are looking to develop other conferences that will add value to our founding companies and members.
Members have access to a rich repository of valuable information through GDA's very own portal, possibility to attend or opportunity to conduct industry-related technical or leadership events, share knowledge and experience and adopt best practice to pave the way for greater sustainability that includes tapping the invaluable expertise of the senior transitional workforce, enhance communication between members to help foster good relations with global industries and associations, provide a voice for members to strengthen the three pillars of strategy: industry, government, and education.
GDA will provide for us an excellent forum to achieve operational excellence in our respective companies in areas like maintenance efficiency, personal efficiency, energy efficiency, as well as capital efficiency and project execution.
The GDA is starting with the Arabian Gulf, of course, but we are also starting big, and we're already interacting with all the multinationals. And the technologies are really going to be an important part of our membership portfolio, the EPC as well. And this is where we feel our strength is, by getting the stakeholders together, networking, identifying the business and technical challenges.
GDA is poised to be the perfect platform for future generations in the GCC. For the youth in the oil, gas and refining sector, it will prepare them for tomorrow's challenges, as well as help them manage the daily hectic demands of this innovative and rewarding industry. The choice is now in our hands. Opportunities are all around us, and together with the GDA, we can create a stronger and more sustainable downstream industry. GDA. Share and excel.
Hello and welcome to GDA Conversations, brought to you by Gulf Downstream Association, which is a non-profit association founded by Saudi Aramco, ADNOC, KNPC, KPI, and BAPCO, with the objective of setting a platform where all the downstream players can come together and exchange their knowledge and experience. GDA Conversations is a series in which we talk to the industry leaders and subject matter experts on relevant topics of wide interest. My name is Raj Hajaria, Technical Manager with GDA. I have today in our today's conversations two guests from Boston Consulting Group. Mr. Mirko Rubeis, he is the Managing Director and partner with BCG. He is a mechanical engineer with 20 years, more than 20 years of experience. And interestingly, he was a project manager in one of our founding company, KPI, Q8. The second guest from Boston Consulting Group is Mr. Graeme McMillan. He is the Associate Director and he is a chemical engineer with a master's, and he has more than 14 years of industry experience, and he has also worked with ExxonMobil in his previous career. Today, we are going to talk about something which all the downstream refiners are worried about, and that is how to accelerate our profitability improvement. And Mirko and Graeme today will shed some light and insight into this topic and will also give us an overview of the market and the way forward. So without further ado, let me welcome Graeme and Mirko.
Hi, Raj.
Welcome, Mirko and Graeme. How are you both?
Very, very well. Very, very well, despite the challenging circumstances.
Excellent, excellent. So let's get kicking with this topic, and I will start with the situation which we are all in. A few months back, in fact, beginning of the year, nobody thought we will be in a situation where we are today. We were running honky-dory with all our plans, with big investments and all the projections, and suddenly we are hit with this crisis. So would you please share your insight into how badly our refiners are impacted by this crisis, both globally as well as in GCC? Would you like to start, Graeme?
Sure, thanks, Raj. Yes, you're right. In many ways, people were expecting 2020 to be a better year for refineries with the IMO regulations. People were actually looking forward to some reasonable margins this year, but I'm sure nobody expected the impact that we've seen. Clearly, it's been a global event for the market, and if you look at the overall oil demand, it dropped by up to 25 million barrels per day back in April, which is quite astonishing. That's a quarter of the global demand for oil. Now, things have recovered a little since, and we're now at around 10 million barrels per day lower demand than was expected. But this is still an enormous demand reduction. To put it into perspective, that's about 3 times the demand destruction that we saw following the last Great Depression. And it's actually the equivalent oil production of Exxon, Shell, BP, Equinor, Eni, Chevron, and and Repsol all combined. Okay, so it's quite an astonishing amount of oil demand that's been taken off the market and remains off the market. Now, focusing a little bit more in the region, in the GCC, we also saw our own demand destruction, as I'm sure everybody on the call would recognize, right? We were talking before we started about the airports being closed, people working from home, not commuting in the cars. So even gasoline was down by about 50% in demand in the region. And what we find is in the region normally, we're actually an exporter of products, right? So if we look back into 2019, the GCC exported just over half of the oil products produced in the region. So if you take that long position in products, and then you have this big local demand destruction, you grow that long position even more, right? So if we had, for example, kept refinery runs the same as 2019 in April and May, we would have had to increase our exports by about 40%. And then if you consider the markets that we export to, so into Europe, into Asia, they were experiencing their own demand reduction and pulling crude runs on their own local refineries. And we saw, refineries in Europe shut down in some cases. We saw refineries in India and China pull rates by 10 to 30%. Then it's very, very difficult to place your products into these markets. On top of that, in April, we had a situation where freight costs also started to increase, and this was really driven by the low crude price and crude and traders wanting to put crude into storage. But this made our exports from the region even less competitive into those export markets. May was the month that we really saw the plateau in margins. So while April saw the biggest drop in demand, it wasn't really until May that really started to have the big impact on margins, as you had this enormous overhang in products that came from April and continued in May. And at the same time, the crude price started to increase as well, as you'll remember. So crude prices increased about $10 a barrel throughout May. And this really squeezed margins. And we saw in Singapore, for example, the Dubai-Singapore cracking margin was in firmly negative territory throughout May, and dropped as low as minus $5 a barrel at one point, which is quite astonishing. Now, as I said, things have recovered a little bit in June. Demand is picked up, but still a long way to go. And margins have also started to recover slightly, but still finding ourselves in an overall negative position on the cracking margins. So overall, it's been a very, very tough month or a few months for refiners around the world, and especially those refiners, like a lot of our refiners in the region, that have a big export position that they need to dispose of.
So what you are saying is, initially it didn't impact so much because there were traders who were picking up the crude for the storage, and that increased the freight rates, and people were holding. But then came a time when WTI index went down to minus 37. Who can forget that black moment? Although it was for a few minutes, I would say, not for a great while, but yet it marked the record in the history. And then now there are some senses returning. Mirko, do you like to put your insight on this negative impact of the crisis on the industry?
No, I mean, I would just maybe emphasize that this black moment, as we call it, emphasize even more how our refiners need to be more and more connected also to the market, through trading or through, because in that particular moment, who were actually integrated into the market, into their trading arm, that's where the one that managed to use their assets, for example, the storage, to do some contango plays or to take advantage of the market, and somehow even offset the losses or the situation that was determined by the normal operation, by the normal crack spread. So that's, I think is important to, I mean, this was a kind of the case in point that proved how it's important for refiner not to be connected really to the market, to the to the traders.
Mirko, can you please explain these terms, contango and super contango, for our general viewers?
Sure. No, it's essentially when you expect the price basically to be higher in the future, and you essentially you buy the crude or the products at a certain point, you pay for the storage, and despite that, you can still lock in the price with the future, and you can still make a margin. So the difference between the future and the cost of price or the cost of the product today still will justify the cost of keeping the product into or the crude into storage. So it's a game, it's a play that has been played very much in the last few weeks and months, and there is a few refiners actually that came out of this very challenging phase with huge margins, because they were using all the storage capacity to basically bet on the future or increase on the crude price or the product price, and that gave profits that were order of magnitude above the one came in just from the normal operations.
And we were watching that when the month was ending, there was a fever pitch race to either rebook at a higher price or sell off, but there were no takers.
Yeah.
So let's move now to the reaction. How do you think GCC refiners and the global refiners reacted to this calamity and this impact? Do you think they addressed it well? They responded well?
Yeah, so I think it's been a very testing time for refiners, and clearly they've had to operate in many ways outside the comfort zone. So the refineries are used to making small incremental changes to adapt the production, but in this environment where it's been extremely volatile, they've had to do things that would normally seem crazy, right, in normal times. I think I would say that the first priority for many refiners, before you even started to think about money, was literally keeping the lights on, right? So obviously companies have a duty to their own employees to keep them safe and healthy, and so this contagion in this pandemic was particularly risky for shift crews and people who are working in large groups day in, day out. So the immediate response had to be to keep them safe and to stop large-scale contagion within the assets, which would actually force a shutdown. But beyond that, I think we saw four, quite typical reactions to manage the short-term impacts. The first one was really optimizing the utilization on the refineries. So as I said earlier, the enormous scale of the demand destruction and long export positions of a lot of refiners in the region meant that they had to pull back crude runs. We saw utilization in April about 20% lower than it was normally that time of year. That's recovered a bit now, but we still see in the region about 10% reduction in utilization to manage the demand. So that was the first one. The second one is to optimize the yield profile of the refinery. So as you know, we have some optionality over cut points and also how we use our conversion units, and to a lesser extent the crude that we choose. And we've seen refiners try to modify their production to match the shift in the market. So the obvious example is on the jet fuel, where refineries have had to make as little jet fuel as they can, which is the complete opposite to the strategy that most refiners have had over the last few years, which is to really push the middle distillate production. The third area is around the maintenance. So we were always expecting a very heavy planned maintenance schedule in the first quarter here in the GCC, And what we've seen was that some refiners tried to optimize that schedule, so perhaps slow down activities to preserve OPEX rather than push maintenance faster to have more uptime. Again, is the opposite that would normally be the case. But we also saw the opposite effect in some cases. So we saw some people forced to actually delay maintenance activities because it wasn't practical or it wasn't safe to get the required workers onto the asset to conduct the work. And that's an example of practicality before the economics. And then finally, but by no means least, there's been some significant effort into short-term cash flow preservation through quite big adjustments to discretionary capital spending and also adjustments to OPEX, some of which has been a result of home working. So for example, we see a lot of training budgets down, travel budgets down, but also there's been a lot more deep OPEX cuts on refineries to manage that short-term cash flow.
So, but I mean, you are absolutely right. Not only the maintenance, we have seen that in some of our member company refineries, they have postponed their turnaround. What they plan to do this year, in this part of the year, they have pushed it either to the later part or maybe even the next year, precisely for the reason of safety of the workers. Do you think, Mirko, IMO regulation also put some extra stress in this crisis?
I would say the events that unfolded somehow were order of magnitude bigger, no? So somehow, yes, put a bit additional stress, but I think probably was not so important as the other effects that were unfolding. So everybody was expecting to be the year of IMO, but in reality, I mean, the driver of what's happening has been driven by these other events.
I was listening to a webinar today morning, and they were saying, somebody from Singapore, that lots of shippers abandoning the ideas of installing scrubbers, and they are going for the low sulfur fuel. And as a result, there is a demand, a higher demand for that, and probably it is fetching higher value than gas oil.
Well, this is I would say is a more, I would always deal with that in more kind of long-term fashion, you know, because at the end it's to satisfy the real demand, the IMO demand with the low sulfur, you need so much desulfurization capacity to be installed across the globe, and so many other kind of things that you can have some tactics in the coming year or two, but it's different from what we will see, you know, in the 5 years time horizon, for example. So yes, definitely they can pay off in the short term. Can also be the right approach. It's just that I would not overweight the behaviors that are taken these days, because these days there is a lot of tactics at play rather than strategy, as in every exceptional circumstances.
And do you think that internationally the refiners also impacted in the same way, responded in the same way, or globally there is a different perspective?
I think broadly they respond in the same way. I think the degree of magnitude and the depth of kind of impact depends, of course, on the underlying also competitive positioning and the configuration, of course, you know, of the different refineries. Of course, who has been very dependent on middle distillate and jet fuel, I know that was clearly the most challenge. But in general, what Graeme also depicted, the four kind of areas, the dimension along which many refiners in the GCC reacted are very similar to the one that were used internationally. Maybe there are a couple of exceptions. I think there has been a bigger push on the crude optimization, on the crude supply optimization, where you've seen many players really optimizing that to a very high degree. And typically that's in the Middle East, given for many refiners, the crude diet is basically given by the local crude. that this is not something that was a lever that was used to this extent. And the other lever is the one I was mentioning at the beginning, so leveraging also the assets as a tools for trading, like in the contango play I was referring to. So kind of pushing a lot the crude optimization, the crude supply optimization, and the contango plays and the trading plays. These are levers that have been used elsewhere and not in the region. But the other levers we listed for GCC, I think they were quite similar.
So, what do you think, Graeme, the future looks like? Is there an end to the crisis in sight?
Good. It's a very good question, because it's, I mean, in BCG, we'd like to depict the crisis, the COVID response in basically 3 phases. We call a flatten phase. That is where essentially you want to flatten the curve, the epidemiological curve of spread of the virus. A fight phase in which essentially you live together with the virus, but essentially you find a way to coexist. And then a later phase that is what we call future, that is after you have essentially found herd immunity or a vaccination program and so on. If you think about the first phase, probably is behind us, kind of the flatten phase. That is the phase in which all the outbreaks were happening in the different countries, lockdown were implemented, and essentially the economy and basically froze. For refiners, that meant essentially 2 things: protecting the workforce and ensure business continuity. So making sure the assets continue running safely. This phase, it's in certain countries we are still in that phase, but essentially this now we understood what to do. We are probably now in most countries are transitioning the second phase, the fight phase. This is the phase in which economies are slightly reopening. Some lockdowns have been carefully lifted. Economic activity is coming back together with demand of fuel, transportation fuels, and all the other refined products. This phase is the most critical to understand what happened in the future, to respond to your question, because this phase can be in the order of magnitude of months or years, and depends on many factors. It's difficult to envision at the moment. Essentially depends, of course, from kind of virus epidemiological aspect of the virus spread that is being studied, and there are many kind of possible scenarios. But depends also on the personal and company decisions. So, for example, companies now has been used to work remotely from home for a while. In this phase, many companies are going back to the office. Many might stay in a kind of remote working remotely. There are personal decisions together. For example, now we are getting close to the summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and we might see different habits of consumption during the summer, the typical summer period that always see a peak, for example, of gasoline demand or the rest. So there is epidemiological aspect, there is a personal and company decision, and there is a government stimulus. I mean, there is a difference in how the different governments are addressing the crisis in terms of stimulus or incentives, support to the different parts of the economies. I mean, the combination of these 3 things will determine how long the second phase will be. And that will have an impact for a recovery, if it's a V-shape, U-shape, L-shape, together with the fuel, the refined products kind of demand recovery. But in general, we can assume it will not be a fast demand recovery. In the Great Recession took more than 2 years to properly kind of recover the demand to pre-crisis level. So it will take time. The future phase is more kind of when we said, you kind of reach a herd immunity, you have a vaccination, and you get back to the normal. The new normal will be different from the old normal, but somehow will be a normal. Will be kind of a normal. What is the impact? How do we envision kind of the end of the tunnel for refiners, for the refined products? I mean, there will be kind of demand recovery that probably will fully materialize in 2, 3, 4 years. In 2022, 23, 24. We don't have the crystal ball, but it will take some time to really for the demand to really go to be sustained. And that will probably also coincide with some good recovery, good peak in terms of refining margins. But if you think about the real long term, and long term, you might think about having a 2030 time horizon. I mean, we go back a bit to what we used to say also before the COVID crisis. You know, there is a structural oversupply of refining capacity that is expected to come in the next 4 or 5 years. That will not be matched, even before COVID, was not matched by expectation in terms of demand growth. And that will continue. You know, capacity growth in Asia and the Middle East is still substantial compared to the demand growth. So we probably see a recovery in terms of even refining demand and refining margin in the medium term. But then there will be still kind of big question mark on the long term, because when all this supply capacity will be really commissioned, also kind of these upgrades will take place. So we are optimistic, I mean, kind of somehow optimistic medium term after the demand recovery take place in the future phase. But the long term, there will be still some question marks.
So I would like you guys to wear your BCG cap. I know it's very difficult to look into the crystal ball, but everyone is doing, and we want you to do that and answer the following questions. Number one, when do you think now the oil demand peak will reach? Whatever earlier people said, now it looks like it will be pushed behind. And when do you think that might happen? And second, when do you think this new normal will start? Or when you think the second phase will end? This year, next year, middle of next year? What's your take on these predictions?
Look, this is not to evade the demand, but we are actually running a lot of quantitative scenarios at the moment. And really the results depends on, since there are probably a number of variables that we never experienced in past crises, no? Because even when you were thinking about 2008, 2009, essentially was a crisis within kind of the, you know, the financial system, but, you know, was kind of, they were much less variable than now. The discussion we had on the second phase, that essentially will depend on the epidemiological aspects of the virus spread, on the kind of measure the government will put in place, the decision of companies will manage kind of the workforce, and how the behaviors of the individuals, of the consumers, and the people will put in place are so big in terms of assumptions that you can have scenarios in which essentially you might also think you have already passed kind of the demand peak. Other scenario which actually demand peak is still to come, probably in that 2022, 24 that we mentioned before, and there are even scenarios in which demand peak will even be pushed forward. So in general, we typically have always kind of strong opinion. We don't like to say always depends. We like to have a strong point of views. But in this specific situation, it's so complex. It really depends on which assumption you put in around the 3-4 variables. You can come out with completely different results. So it's still early to say.
And maybe just to add to that, Mirko, I think even when you look beyond the immediate COVID and these four elements or the elements that Mirko discussed, you also see these long-term structural issues in the industry that Mirko discussed, right? So the long-term oil demand has a growth vector driven by the GDP and the sector growth of the product, but also there's big reduction variables, as we said, on energy efficiency and also the energy transition as people start to move away from traditional fuels. And then, Raj, as you mentioned, IMO and some of the big game changers around the bunkers market. These elements combined also put a lot of question marks on the long-term projection. So I think while it's good to try and have a crystal ball, it's very important for refiners to have a very clear view on different scenarios and be able to respond to different scenarios
Mm-hmm.
depending on how these various trends and macro trends evolve.
So what you are saying is probably it can be V, it can be U, it can be L, any recovery shape, and depends on what assumptions you base upon. And the best answer probably is to remain agile and adapt as the market changes. Do you think that this crisis has impacted the energy transition towards the green fuel, electric batteries, and electric vehicle? Do you think that they have got some kind of impact of this crisis?
Look, just before this crisis, there was a big commitments made by the key players, no? And these commitments actually have been reaffirmed even recently during this crisis. I think that will continue its path as it was, and difficult to. I mean, it's not that COVID has not affected that, but I think the transformation was already underway well before COVID, and it will continue. No, I think this is something that is another big variable, as correctly Graeme added, is another big variable to be considered when planning different scenarios. I mean, the good news, although there is so much uncertainty in demand, the margins, and supply demand, I think there is a number of levers in any case that can be put in place, and they are valid in most scenarios. I mean, there is some big bet in case you believe in one scenario or the others, but there is a big chunk of levers actually are valid across the spectrum.
Good. Let's move to the solution. What, in your opinion, refiners can do to accelerate their refinery margin or profitability?
So maybe I take this, Mirko. So I think here specifically in the region, we can think about this in two categories, right? And I think both have this underpinning theme of remaining agile and being able to put in place levers that can work in many scenarios, as Mirko said. And I would group them really into two buckets. The first bucket would be things that are not new to refiners, right? That we've been talking about for a long time, but really now get a new sense of urgency and really become not discretionary, right? They become about survival rather than nice to have. And then there's some other levers which haven't been utilized so much in the region, or are driven by new technologies that make them now possible. If we think about the first category of things that aren't new, I think anybody in the industry would be familiar with operational excellence. I know as long as I've been working in refining, we've been talking about it. And I think these levers are as relevant as ever, right? So I think when it comes to if it comes to things like planning and scheduling, so you mentioned earlier, Raj, about the IMO and the very low sulfur fuel oil. So we were able to see some refiners really take advantage of this new very low sulfur fuel oil product at the start of the year, which, as you rightly pointed out, was being priced on a marginal basis with gas oil for some time. Planning and scheduling teams really have their work cut out for them just now, because they're having to do things that normally would seem crazy, right? Like pulling conversion units and taking big cuts in crude. So having very strong abilities, really being able to interpret what the linear program is saying and being able to be agile and adjust the scheduling is really important. Then on the operations side, really having the organization with a cost culture and a value culture, chasing the optimization on the cut points, really pushing the conversion units. This can really be the difference between making money and not making money at the moment. Then, on the cost side, if we think about energy efficiency, this is an area that the region is really lagged in, primarily because the energy costs have meant that being a laggard in terms of energy performance has not been as costly as it would be for a competitor somewhere else in the world. So, a third quartile energy efficiency refinery in the GCC can get away with something that would be fatal for a refinery in Europe. But this is a big source of savings on variable costs and will get new emphasis, especially as we see gas prices starting to creep up over the last years and potentially into the future. Then normal levers on maintenance, efficiency, on productivity, on doing the right work at the right time, balancing insourcing and outsourcing of work is very important on the fixed costs, as is the organizational efficiency. And then we see other levers that Mirko talked about on the inventory side, using our tanks in non-traditional ways to play with the markets is another lever. So that's one sort of large bucket of operational excellence, which is not new, but becomes very essential. Then I think you have the link to trading. So over the last few years, we've seen many of the NOCs in the region start to invest more and more in having trading capabilities. And in this market environment, this can be very powerful, right? Because you have that direct interface with the market and that more real-time feedback and geographical spread of the products. And then I think you have the second category that I was discussing, which is things that maybe haven't been exploited fully. And the first one here, I think, that stands out in the region is on the crude supply side. I think Mirko alluded to it earlier, but if you look at most of the refineries in the region, they run a single crude supplied by the upstream sister company of the NOC. And this can be a big advantage because my logistics costs are low, I have a steady supply, steady operations, but it can also mean missed opportunities, especially in capturing short-term opportunities on the crude market and being a bit more nimble in our ability to adapt the yield profile of the refinery to suit the market. So we see, some steps by some of the players in the region to start to diversify a little bit, but there's still a long way to go if you compare to, say, a refinery in Europe that would typically run 20 plus crudes blended at any given time, and most of them imported. And then I think the second part of this yet to be exploited bucket is in the digital technologies. And maybe here I would hand over to Mirko, who's got a lot of experience in implementing these digital solutions recently in the region.
Yeah, no, digital is a word probably is abused in the last 2 or 3 days. Now there is a lot of emphasis on this. Everybody push a lot of digital solutions and so on. Sometimes are just old IT solutions rebranded digital. There is a lot of hype, but still there is a lot of money on the table. And maybe let me list few concrete application where I saw we really see value in that. And that's now is a big chunk also what we do with refiners, because actually there is a lot of value in there. So I found 4 or 5 areas I think are particularly worth mentioning. I mean, the first one is clearly in the planning and scheduling. We call next generation planning and scheduling. I mean, this is where kind of advanced analytics, can really kind of make a big differentiator. And crude analytics, data analytics link, for example, to a problem of, for example, crude supply optimization, can also give a solution in very real time, with a big value. In blending, or for example, what we call the control towers, that is essentially controlling, optimizing from the planning up to the way to the scheduling, to the logistics, to even to the kind of the pricing. So on the planning and scheduling, there is a lot of value. There is a lot of value in what we call advanced market-driven operations. What does it mean? Means basically to bring more information to the operators. I mean, today operators in the control room, they optimize pressure, temperature, and so on, but they never optimize their money, right? So there is not this, the economic information, the dollar value, the actions is not visible real time. So how can you, our kind of the problem statement is how we can optimize economically if who has actually pushed the button doesn't have that information at hand. So, and in this regard, I mean, you can think of solutions where you can actually have a real-time impact in dollars in the control room of each action that you take in real time. And you can make the right trade-off, you can take the right decision. And this also can, at the end, ultimately result in what is typically called a real-time optimizer or advanced HPC. So, but essentially it's bringing this information, the dollar in the algorithms, there where actually the decisions are taken. And this is what we call advanced market-driven operation, because actually you leverage the market data, for example, of prices and so on, to take those economic decisions. There is a third dimension that is very important, is asset management. We talk a lot about predictive maintenance. You know, there is a lot of hype also predictive maintenance. Truth to be told, today there are not many players actually still monetizing the potential of predictive maintenance, but definitely is an area that in the future we really can yield a lot of benefit for for different players. Together with the predictive maintenance, other big area in asset management is all the part related to the control process. So, for example, to the safe permit issuance, the management of the maintenance, planning of the maintenance, and so on. So the asset management is not a big area. Then we will get to another area that is also very important, that is the safety and productivity of the workforce. Through digital, a lot can be done. You know, can imagine you can have a geolocalization of operators, you can have a lot of alarm, man down, or things like that, together with tools that actually increase their productivity. Imagine having a digital checklist or many other tools can actually make the work of the workforce much easier. It can also increase the skill. For example, imagine just the virtual training in terms of virtual reality training that we actually have implemented in several refineries. And then there is the fifth dimension that is the one we are alluding many times, that is interface with trading. Again, there, if you can, trading or just the market, imagine an ability to better forecast demand. To better forecast demand will allow you to better forecast prices. You have better input for your LP, and for any tools that you use in the refinery, you need to have this very good demand and very good estimate, for example, of prices. And then if you manage to link it also, for example, to optimizing your inventory to make plays like the contango we mentioned before and so on, it becomes even more powerful. So if I can summarize, these 5 areas I think are quite important, is what we call next generation planning and scheduling, the advanced market-driven operations, the asset management, the safety and field productivity, kind of digital workforce, and then these trading and commercial interfaces. These are 5 areas that digital can really add value in an asset like a refinery.
So very well said and very well put. Digitalization definitely is a cornerstone of success for the future, especially when the new normal happens. A lot of workforce will probably still not be on the job, on the site, and we can probably take help of the robotics to do the frontline inspection and maintenance, and use the artificial intelligence in the back end for analyzing that massive pool of data, and help the people in the back end, perhaps from home or from their safe offices, to take the right and correct decisions. That could be probably one of the few. So the investment in digitalization probably, I think, will accelerate in this period.
No, that's true. That's very true. Although I always, in digital, I will always suggest to learn to walk before running. Meaning, so there is a lot of hype, for example, a real-time optimizer. Now that you want something that optimizes fully your units, your process without any intervention. I mean, it's great, and I'm sure it will come in the next 10 years. But first, we need to give, for example, keep the operators in the control room, on the field, and so on, to give them the right decision support through digital. So you will have a phase in which essentially still the human will take the decision, but it will be helped by a lot of digital tools that will inform such decisions. Up to a point in which then you will get, you will be comfortable to automate more and more the decision, but still with a kind of oversight and supervision of a human. And then to the last end, to the end point where actually you can fully optimize and having a real-time optimizer. But first we need to go step by step. And that's, I think, is a typical pitfall we find in many players who want to immediately go to the last step. but then it's a too big of a bite, to swallow. So it's important to first enable the workforce today to take the right decision through digital.
Yeah, I think Raj, where you see this opportunity to accelerate things through the experiences we've had through the COVID-19 crisis are the kind of ways of working, right? So when vast majority of the workforce suddenly finds themselves working from home, right? Not the plant operators, but all the support that behind them. Then this does give an opportunity to start to fundamentally think about the way that we organize ourselves and the way that we organize our work. And I think that is an opportunity for people to take advantage of the lessons that they've had to learn very fast over the last few weeks and months.
Do you have a view on sprint robotics? I believe they are specializing into the application of robotics in the energy industry in a big way. Do you think GCC refiners can capitalize on their experience?
If we take ourselves into a refinery situation, actually there's not too much manual interaction, right, with the plant. So the typical plant is run with 4 or 5 operators to run it and to open some valves. A lot of the advantage you get from robotics, I think, is more on the thinking side, right? And as Mirko said, helping people to think and to make the right decisions rather than to physically move things on the plant, which is maybe the big advantage you get from robotics in some other areas in manufacturing. So I think it has its elements and it has its uses, but I don't see it as the major value lever on refineries when it comes.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of inspection and maintenance, which is human intensive.
Yeah, no, there are many applications. For example, with drones, even today, you can. So there are definitely activities there. That is, I think you can save. Is really focused on efficiency. Is essentially a rule. You basically get a robot to do the activity of a human. But I think what is really the value is where you can take better decision, better optimization decision. So when you think about big data analytics, artificial intelligence, it might potentially optimize, for example, the yields, improve to take a decision that will optimize the yields of a refinery, has by far a bigger impact than optimizing, replacing the human component. Digital often is, many people work in the field are always a bit afraid of digital because they think that could be a risk to lose their job. Actually, in most cases, that's really not what digital will do. Because in reality, the big value is optimizing and taking better decisions. That's where the big impact is, and make the work of operator safer and be more productive. But actually, it's not so much on replacing humans with machines. That is, I think it's in process industry like refining, the big levers is not that. It is more kind of optimizing the throughput, the energy efficiency. These are the big ticket items.
Yeah, I think I really agree with that. And when we run operational excellence programs and digital programs with refineries, we find 60 to 80% of the value improvement typically comes from squeezing the margin, right, from better optimization, from better uplift, to better yield profiles, rather than purely from cost reductions. So it's very important to have that cost focus and to squeeze cost out where you can, but shouldn't be at the detriment of trying to grow the margin on the refinery.
So let me ask my last question before I open the floor for our subject matter experts. There have been some move towards the capex reduction in many projects, upstream and downstream, especially in upstream. Some of the countries in GCC have made announcement to delay or defer their investment. Do you think this will have some impact in the near future, say few years down the line, when suddenly one of the scenario which you don't want to indicate, becomes real and there is a surge in demand and there is not much of capacity to produce.
Maybe no, because that was an interesting topic we're discussing a lot with our clients. There is among the many scenarios, so let me say it's not a deterministic, but there is clearly a scenario in which the unprecedented reduction in capex, it is especially in upstream, has been kind of unprecedented. It might create a potential kind of shortage, if the demand grows. That's in one scenario. This is something that might happen. So you might have kind of a medium-term scenario before the actual demand destruction happens, that is given by the energy transition, by efficiency. So before the real structural demand destruction starts, you might have an intermediate period in which demand still is continue growing, but you don't have enough kind of source of supply. So you can have in one scenario, that is not the only one, but there is in one scenario in which you might have a peak kind of potentially of prices, because the demand might outstrip supply. There is also other scenario in which, especially the one that basically says that the demand peak is already behind us, that actually will basically say that the cut in supply that the reduction in supply that is consequent to this reduction in capex will go hand in hand with the reduction in demand, and so that we do not peak. But there is a scenario that actually will behave in the way that you described when you run the numbers.
Thank you very much, Mirko and Graeme. I will now open the floor for our subject matter experts. We are joined by our Secretary General, Mr. Auda Al-Ahmadi, and also subject matter experts from 3 technical committees: Operational Excellence, Industry Trend, and Project Management. So give me a moment before I bring them on.
Thank you. Thank you, Raj, and thank you, gentlemen, for the excellent presentation. I come from the engineering services area. I've previously worked with an oil production company in Saudi for many, many years, but now shifted to engineering. Going forward, and the indication about more automation, more digitization, and what you call next generation planning, this will require a new set of knowledge and skills that will be required to support that, which is not easily available today, because today we're still in the typical engineering services, where it's yes, we shifted into working from home and we'll be able to continue with our engineering project. I'm sharing my thoughts here and look for your input. There's going to be a lack of the set of skills required, really, especially in the region here. Maybe in Europe or North America, it's a little bit advanced, but over here, it's going to be a lack of set of skills in that service.
No, it's a very good question, because in reality, even in more mature markets, it will be a challenge. And so, you will have still people like Graeme and myself, chemical, mechanical engineers in the refinery, but you will have also a new set of skills when you have to manage and optimize artificial intelligence, big data analytics. You need to have data scientists, you need to have data engineers, you need to have competencies that today you don't have, and very few players have in the world. Now, I give you another bad news. The data scientists don't want to work for
news, please, Eric.
No, but that's true. The data scientists and experts in artificial intelligence don't necessarily want to work for a refinery. They probably want to work for the Amazon, the Google of this world. And so you will have even you will have a shortage of this talent that you will have to recruit. And you have even more challenges, because typically you're not the natural kind of employer. So you will have to find also a way to attract this talent in a different way, also attracting them with a different way of working. Typically, this kind of talent requires less hierarchy, less structure, less of this, less formal that we typically are used to do in a plant. And this is, I think, would be the biggest challenge, to create an environment that in which this talent can still thrive and support you, but in the same time, they can find fulfillment from the job, and you can actually compete with the companies that actually could be, the brand could be much more attractive in general. So many players, and I give you the example also in automotive space, I think they created separate kind of part of the organization labeled as digital. And in this kind of part of the organization, you find a bit different way of working, a bit different culture within the company. And this coexists with the normal traditional manufacturing culture. I think that's something that will happen in the oil and gas, and is already happening. I think it will be a challenge even more acute than in other industries, because again, the oil and gas is not the most obvious choice for somebody that is expert in artificial intelligence.
So, Mirko, what you are saying is it is wise to make investment in the skill at the current time so that you are ready when it is required.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even the education to support that set of skills, as well.
Very good. We go to Mr. Imad from OPEC. Mr. Imad, you have a question. Please go ahead.
My question is, do you think that the integration with the petrochemical plants can help the refiner to minimize the negative impacts of this crisis, and can help the refiner to maximize its profitability? Also, not only the petrochemical integration with petrochemicals, also the integration between refineries can help, or it will not. What can you see in this matter?
So I think it's a great point, and I think with or without the crisis, this is a lever that makes sense in almost any scenario. And I think now in the GCC we have some of the biggest industrial cities and complexes in the world, in Jubail, in Yanbu, in Rubeis, Sohar, in Oman, and yes, there's lots of opportunities to further integrate between the refinery and the petrochemicals, both in the streams, but then also in other areas like organizations, in infrastructure, and utilities. So I think it's definitely a very important lever, even before COVID, and will continue to be afterwards.
Mm-hmm. How about the integration between refiners in the closed area?
Yeah, so there is obvious synergies that can be extracted there. Yeah. It's clear. We know probably what are the clusters also in the Middle East that could benefit from that. The real thing is that when you only talk about refiners, you will extract more kind of synergies of the same, right? So you will create a bit more optionality. Of course, you can create more optionality for different flows to be processed by the different units, but still you will create, I think the integration with chemical, the thing is that it will give you access to complete new value pools, no? And in a market that substantially, we still believe it will grow above GDP in the future, no? Compared to transportation fuels that will actually probably will grow below it, probably decline. So that's I think the fundamental difference, and it will give you probably even more kind of optionality on that space. It's a good question, because also I think today to have a very competitive assets, need to be integrated with chemicals, right? That is kind of the only asset probably today will still make be reasonably profitable in the future. But what is the real thing? Also, the challenge for who produce petrochemical. There are also challenges in that side. And if I think about the GCC, many producers, have been good at manufacturing basic chemicals, but not, for example, on marketing. And that's I think is with a high reliance on third parties, on trader distributors, and if you want to defend certain markets, even in chemicals, you need to be closer to the market. So even that, you need to create a marketing organization that has a bigger reach to end users. That is very important. And together, if you need to also to create to be a bit many players need to be more sophisticated in how they manage the SOP process. You know, how they integrate, how you take optimize the agility of the of those decisions. And then, of course, you need to also think about the competitiveness that was once in the GCC was essentially given by the ethane. That today, especially now in a very lower price environment, might not be necessarily true all the time. Still, there is still a clear advantage, but I mean, still comparing with the US and to even naphtha crackers with a very lower price, you might also argue about that. So even for petrochemical players, it's integrating to chemical is not just the solution that will solve all the problems of the refiners. You know, there will be also a kind of challenges and things to be faced when you are in that space. But definitely in terms of value pools, if you look at the next 20 years, is a value pool, the chemicals that will grow definitely more than transportation fuel. So definitely give you exposure to, if you want to a healthier growth.
Thank you.
Maybe just to add one other thing. When you say the integration between refineries, obviously if you have refineries near to each other, then you can find these integrations. But similarly to the crude supply question, you know, I think we see lots of opportunities also for import and export of intermediates around the region to fill in balances, and especially around conversion units. So, you know, even if the refineries aren't side by side, there may still be opportunities for further integration through the balancing of intermediates.
Thanks, Graeme. Thanks, Mirko. I believe Mohammed Hamad, you have one more question.
Yes, if you don't mind, being an oil-driven economy here in the GCC, short-term prospect, do you think the OPEC and OPEC Plus agreement to reduce the production will yield some results, and we're going to see an improvement in the oil prices to continue to rise above 40 plus?
I would not dare to predict oil price. I learned in my 20 years. If there is one thing you don't want to predict, is oil price.
Today, the demand is down by about 10 million barrels, right? And that's about the same size as the recent agreement with the OPEC Plus, right? So right now, that's about almost the same, but the sheer magnitude of the demand destruction means that, as Mirko says, it would be, you have to be very careful when making a prediction.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
Especially because there is also, I mean, I think also storage is a record high, you know, so there is a lot of kind of second order implication effects that are more complex than supply and demand. You know, there is a lot of plays, for example, in the storage and trading markets that, I mean, that's brings a lot of impact on the price.
Thank you. Abu Tariq, we go to our Secretary General, Mr. Auda Al-Ahmadi.
Thank you very much, Mirko and Graeme, for your valuable insights. And thank you for your participation with us in this conversation. From what I understood, that it may take 3 to 4 years to recover, the demand to recover. Do you think with this longer period can, refiners can withstand or sustain their sales for so long, for that period? That's one question. The other question, will we see now a freeze in the investment in the downstreams for some time? Thank you.
So, yes, no, good, thank you. I think in the recovery, we say it's not necessarily 4 years. Now we say probably 22, 20, over. So it can be a couple of years, but it's a very good question. Can refiners sustain this long period of pressure? I think not necessarily will be a time of only depressed margin, but will be a time of very highly volatile, very high volatility. So you probably will see margins follow kind of patterns that you would not expect, that are very difficult to predict. So you will have very high volatility. That is what you would expect in the next 2 or 3 years. And what is probably always true is that we see refiners that are still kind of given, of course, given the configuration of the assets, but also given this decision that we were mentioning in terms of measure to be taken, that actually even today, as we speak, are performing much better than others and are actually will be able to sustain. Of course, this situation will give a further blow to assets that were already kind of have some challenges in terms of profitability or efficiency. That is obvious. The capex we expect to be also some effect also for refiners. Some capex rationalization will happen also for refiners, and I think we need to be ready also for that. So a lot of I think a lot of I mean, the beauty of many things that we have been discussing, from digital, to the crew supply optimization, to the trading measures and so on, they don't require a huge amount of capex, but still can yield quite some significant benefits. But I agree with you, there will be kind of a lot of more scrutiny on big capital programs.
But don't you think for also to improve the margin, sometimes you need to spend, especially in digitalization or automation, you need to spend on capital so that you improve your margin or increase your efficiency. So do you think there'll be on cap, there'll be some investment?
Yeah, no, there will be, I mean, the investment, even in digital, still are investments, are relevant investments, but they will not be as heavy as, the typical investment we typically used to adding new units or to, that is typically is an order of magnitude above that.
Yeah, sure. Yes, thank you.
But there will be capex. There will be, I mean, necessarily you will always incur kind of some capex. Even just to add some storage capacity to be ready for contango plays and trading, you need to add storage. It is why not, and so on. So in digital also there is there are capex, but again, I would say are much more capital efficient than the typical investment just in pure steel that we are used to.
Thank you. Thank you, Mirko. Thank you, Avtarek. Amna from Satorp, you have a question.
This is Amna from Satorp. My question is to either one of you. It's about the IMO, because we have read a lot of articles in the past that IMO would positively impact the gross margin for the low sulfur diesel producers. And we're not sure if the market will retain this, I would say, expectations toward end of the year 2020 for the IMO implementation. When do you foresee this happening in the market? Thank you.
Maybe I start here, Mirko.
Sure.
So yeah, I think everybody expected 2020 to be the year of IMO, right? And we expected the light heavy differentials to open up, and this was, as you say, benefit the refineries making low sulfur diesel. I think the reality has been that this big demand reduction from COVID has actually reduced the supply of the gasoline diesel, or the demand for the gasoline diesel modules, which has caused these refinery run cuts. So actually what we find is the amount of residue or high sulfur fuel oil making its way onto the market is actually less. And that's keeping the overall balances for vacuum residue in what we would call conversion modes, right, where it's being valued as feed for conversion units rather than as its alternative fuel. So 2020 actually has turned into pretty much the same pricing mechanism as we saw last year, which keeps the margins down. Now, as we come out of, as the demand starts to pick up, and some of the supply additions that maybe will be a bit delayed. What most of our models predict is that starts to switch back a bit later than we thought originally. So whereas IMO 2020 would be the year that you see the big impact on the margins, probably that's more like 2022 now, after the demand picks up, and we could have 2 or 3 years of reasonably good light heavy differential before the market reestablishes and we go back to tighter margins. So I think probably it's not going to be the party that everybody expected in 2020. I think maybe where IMO does give some opportunities is for refiners that have flexibility to respond to the new product that's basically come onto the market, which is the very low sulfur fuel oil, which we saw trading actually close to gas oil prices pre-COVID. So having the flexibility to adjust to the shifting demand around the fuel oils, it could be something that provides some extra margins this year.
Thank you, Graeme.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Amna. Any other question from other subject matter experts? If not, thank you very much, Mirko. Thank you very much, Graeme. And thank you very much, all the participants, all our subject matter experts. And we really appreciate your time and effort you have given for this conversation. I hope everyone benefited from this discussion. We know we don't have any clear path outside this crisis, but obviously we have got a lot of food for thought, and perhaps we can make our own judgment, we can make our own prediction. And as Mirko said, you take assumptions, what you feel comfortable with, and then make your plan accordingly. But the key is agility and adaptability. You need to remain agile and adapt as situations change. So with those thoughts, let me end this conversation. And for the viewers, we have been conducting these conversations over the last 3 months, and we have been interviewing and talking to many industry leaders and subject matter experts. If you want to visit our previous conversations, watch those interviews, please go to our website. All the conversations are available there. So with all those thoughts, let me thank you once more, and God bless. Keep safe, keep healthy.